Hey y'all, thanks for stopping by Sandy Bottom Homestead. Hope you're having a fantastic day. And it's been roughly a year, let's just call it a growing season, all the way through with our drip system. And I kind of want to talk about what I think about it because I was real hesitant for a long time for it. And I'm going to show you what I've done, what I'm using, what I've tried, and then kind of go over the pros and cons. So I hope if you guys are on the fence about getting a drip system, this may help you go either way. So last winter we came through and we put a drip system in every single bed here. And these two beds are new. We just put this one in the other day and we have this one hard plumbed in. And then we also have a drip system over here in the wild garden, the 4 beds. I gotta say, it was very intimidating. I wasn't really, I resisted it for a long time. I just didn't want to do it. It was a lot of work, that was being said, but I didn't have total faith because it gets really hot here and I didn't know if that was going to be a benefit or really a problem. But we had tried a couple different systems in the past and I'm looking, I don't have the entire system anymore, but I have like pieces and parts of it that I can show you. And I've got a piece in here in the greenhouse so that I will show you. Before I do that, I may want to, in case you're new to the channel, just show you what I'm running now first, and then we can go into what we've tried. Since this one's it's not totally covered up yet, you can see that we've got drip tape on there with 1-foot emitters, and basically we just built this ourselves. And it was very intimidating, like I said earlier. Previous years, we've tried numerous things, and in different gardens throughout my gardening experience, we had different stuff. I did use soaker hoses at one point, and they were pretty successful in a previous garden, but I wasn't so on board with it here. And I'll show you, in case you're not sure what a soaker hose is, there's 2 kinds. I've got one kind, but the other one is just the same. You got this hose right here. This is in place, but I don't even use it anymore. I need to pull it up this winter. And it's just porous, and when it inflates, it seeps water out all along it. And it's good for doing a big area. Like for this little bed here, it did pretty well because it just kind of seeps out and saturates the ground. There's another drip hose kind of like that, that's more hard rubber, and it's the same thing, same idea, it just doesn't compress or deflate when it's not being used, and it works good, but there's definitely downfalls behind it. First downfall was, like you can see here, if you're going to run that, you have to run it through all the beds. And this actually isn't a big downfall, but I didn't like it. In order to go from bed to bed to bed, I just kind of had a hose draped over in between. And it was a trip hazard, it's very unsightly. I just really wasn't impressed. Now, little do I know, I could have built something like this and just plumbed it in like I did, because this runs all the way underground to that bed and then comes up. At the time, I just didn't have the knowledge. I mean, I'm just gonna be honest, like, you know, I was ignorant to the situation, and that's quite all right, it happens. But that was a big issue. Now, the other and the main issue for that was when you start getting into a bigger garden like that, you get water pressure issues. And so you know, I would actually have to run, and at the time I was running, I think I had 4 beds out there, and I'd have to run 2 beds and then cut it off and then switch a switch and then run 2 more beds. So it's kind of a pain in the butt. And I mean, it did great saturating the ground, but you know, that just didn't work for me. Now, especially if you want to have your garden grow like we've done here, and you know, we're still working on it, so it's going to be messy for a little while, but if you want your garden to keep growing, it's important to have a system that you can add on to. And there's one thing that I've tried to do in my life for the past couple of years. I've just been trying to remove friction from it. And you know, there's nothing that's going to make me more unsuccessful than not being able to water a garden easily. That's just a recipe for disaster. For instance, I did a video and attempted to years ago. I was going to start growing mushrooms, and I had read the most important thing was put your mushroom bed next to a water source because you're going to need to water a lot. Well, I didn't do that, and guess what happened? I didn't get any mushrooms, and I was super pumped to get some, so it just didn't work out. So, you know, I wanted to remove that friction. Then we came and we took that system out, and actually all the old hoses I put into all my flower beds, because even though I don't water them a lot, sometimes I will turn them on just to kind of help. But we took that system out and then we bought another system. Well, this next system I bought at a home improvement store, and it was cheap. I think it was probably 20, 30, 50 bucks, something like that. I don't remember the exact cost of it, but that was what I thought was gonna be the answer. And so I went to that, and basically what it was is it consisted of these two fittings. So you would put the fittings in, you had multiple fittings you could use. This one does like a mist. So you could, you can change it so it shoots up, it makes more of a mist, whatever. And this one's basically the same thing. It would shoot a mist, but then it'd also have water come out the sides like a little fountain. Now this has its uses, but it also used a 1/4 inch hose to go around. So I installed this system, was super excited about it. And what I noticed, it was the same thing. It was a water pressure issue. So what would happen is it would go through the garden. I could run down the line and I could see that it would get less and less and less water pressure going all the way through, to where again, only about, I think it was 1.5 beds were able to be watered at once. And that was a real issue. And I ran it for a year and I just did not have a good year that year. I ended up having to supplement with a sprinkler. I ended up fighting it a lot. It was just a major issue. Not to mention these get clogged. The mulch would cover them, and it was just a nightmare. And I ended up putting them in the greenhouse too, which they did okay in the greenhouse now because that's a very small contained area. So the greenhouse, it worked okay, but the problem was because it misted up, I came to the conclusion that I was losing a lot of water. Now what I could have done is had it like a system where it hung down and misted down. That may have worked a little bit better, but still it's a mist. So you're not really getting good water into your garden. And we ended up taking this out. And so at this point I was just like, no, I hate drip systems, no more, no more, no more. And then I came across Drip Depot. I had used sprinklers, and I've used sprinklers basically exclusively for, I think of the 18 years I've been gardening, probably 16 of those years. Well, now 15 of them. And they always worked fine, but I always had diseases and stuff. So I went to Drip Depot. I called them, or I emailed them. I ended up talking to them on the phone. They walked me through the whole thing. We got all the parts put together that we needed, and then they helped me with my water pressure to see how much we could sustain. So I had to get my water pressure. I did a calculation on it, and you can Google how to get your water pressure without a water pressure gauge, because I didn't want to buy a $40 water pressure gauge for one time. And it gave you a good estimate. They walked us through, and that's why I went with the 1 foot emitters. But I had been stained because of all these other methods that I have tried because of my water pressure issue. And my water pressure issue simply comes because I run all the way down. I have a hose running into the woods all the way down to feed my garden. When I know that I need to put a water faucet out here that just brings me water, but that's a different story. So I put in this drip system that we have now. Before we get started on the pros and cons, let us know in the comments below if you have a drip system, what you're using, or if you're interested in doing a drip system and what's holding you back. As you can see, we do have a fairly decent sized garden here, and we've definitely gotten a little bit bigger this year. So there was 100% a cost issue with installing this drip system here. That was the first hurdle that I had to get over mentally. In order to put in a drip system for a greenhouse, and I can even include these 2 new beds because I had leftover parts, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 10 garden beds. So a greenhouse and 10 garden beds, it cost me about $420. What a great number, huh? So $420 to install it, and I was like, man, I didn't want to do that. I really didn't want to do that. I think I found a coupon code, maybe saved a couple bucks. And I had been burned because I just wasn't sure. So I kept having disease issues. I kept having watering issues, overwatering, underwatering, just all over the place with it. You know, the hot, the cold. And in the wintertime, the problem I had is I would have a lot of like fungal disease, leaf disease and stuff like that happen. I got white mold last year, which was really scary because sometimes it's hard to get rid of and you're kind of stuck with it and you can't plant in the bed for years after you get it. Luckily, that's not my case, but that was an issue that we were kind of potentially going to deal with. So we put it in, but the cost was definitely like my first con. Now, my second con was the installation process. So I'll kind of show you where I had to dig out and how much I had to dig out, and you'll see why it was so much of a hassle to install it. Our main water output comes from this valve down here. And I actually came through, and all these black hoses you see I made myself, but I have my main filter coming in right here. And then I just kind of plopped it there. I wasn't really thinking ahead, which was kind of my fault, but it is what it is. And then we went in over here and then we dug. So we dug a trench that goes all the way to about here. And then we teed it off to go to this bed. And then we ran another line all the way to the greenhouse over here. Right there is where it goes in. And then we teed it off the tee here. We came here, turned it, and then we dug a trench that goes all the way across there. And in each bed, it kind of teed off. So we put a line in here, came through, teed it into this one, came through. We just added a tee here to go to these beds, came through here all the way down to here, went into this bed, and then kept going all the way to get water into this section. Initial installation was kind of a pain, and that was the hardest part, by far the hardest part. So we got it all dug in, did it fine, did it in the middle of winter. It was cold, whatever. It's a lot easier to do in the fall, as I've just found out. And, you know, we kind of made it happen. So the installation process was a problem. It took me one full day to get the main part of it put into this side of the garden. And the wild garden I did in like half a day, which was only 4 beds. But at that point, I had kind of knew what I was doing, so it wasn't as bad. And what I did, instead of just digging a trench, I have a little hand tiller, and I hand tilled it all the way through and got it worked up, and then kind of turned the soil and got it buried. So I really wanted to have the lines buried. That was like really important to me. And that was, you know, my second big con for it. Now, my third con is it needs repairs every once in a while. So what happens is there's 2 things that happen frequently this year with it. The first thing, which is free to fix but super annoying, is these hoses will pop out of this connection. You just have to put it in. So you have to be kind of vigilant. Now, if you were to go out of town and your timer comes on and it's messed up, then that could be an issue. But for the most part, that's not been, I'd probably have to fix it about once a month in some beds somewhere. So that's an issue. Another issue is these hoses here, the drip tape, animals like to chew on it. I mean, as soon as I got the system installed, guess what happened? An animal chewed on it. And it's happened a few times now, more times than not. Now, the benefit of it, when you buy the drip tape, you just buy a big roll of it, and you're more than likely going to have some left over, and you're going to need that leftover drip tape for sure. So that's kind of an issue. But I think what the cause is that, and I'm not sure, but I use a injector, and actually it happened before I injected fertilizer into it, but I do use an injector, and I think half the time they're going after the smell of the fertilizer in it, but there's not much I can do that. What I've started doing is I've started flushing it afterwards. So I'll run it, I'll turn the injection off, and then I'll just flush the system afterwards for like 10 minutes, and it seems to work fine. So those are the big cons behind this whole system. There's probably more, but they're so minute, it's not really that big a deal. And if you look at it, And what we've done this year and our results, we're pretty happy with it. I was an unbeliever, but now I'm a believer. So the first pro is it's water, it's efficient. Hands down, no evaporation of water, very minimal evaporation of water. You're not watering the grass outside. I'm not watering anything else other than what I want to water. And to kind of there's like a 2-in-1 scenario here. And I know I've showed everybody this a couple times, but on each bed, I have these switches in which I can just turn off each bed individually. So for instance, this bed over here had sweet potatoes in it, and I wanted to not water it for 2 weeks before I pulled my sweet potatoes. So I was just able to turn the water off, and it wouldn't get any water other than rain, which you can't stop. But other than that, there wasn't an issue. This bed, for instance, sat empty for a while, and I didn't want to water it because nothing was really happening, so I just turned the water off to it. So that's really a big plus in my mind, the fact that I can turn water off. The greenhouse, for example, when I was done using it, I could just turn the water off completely and not have any more water going into it. That's a huge savings in water. And even if you don't, I know we estimate that our water bill, and there's going to be a range here, dropped by 50% to a quarter, somewhere in that range. It's hard to tell, but it definitely dropped. And we had to water longer. So we used to run our sprinkler for an hour every other day, and now we're running the drip system for 90 minutes every other day in the summertime. In the winter, I mean, we're down to like every 3 days it comes on, but it's the same time frame. So that definitely helps keep down the water, and then the wasted water around it, which helped keep the weeds down because we weren't watering the weeds as well. So the weeds would come up to seed a lot faster because they were stressed, and we could knock them back, and we were able to keep the weeds out of our garden better, which was something I did not expect to happen. That was just kind of like a benefit, a side benefit. Benefit was plant diseases. So these green beans never produced this year. They got mosaic virus, has nothing to do with water. That was from the Japanese beetle feeding on them and spreading disease, is my suspicion. But here you see what's left of our cucumbers. Now typically our cucumbers will get disease ridden. We'll plant them in April or May, and then by July they're done. And we had these plants going all the way up until September. So we got another 2 months out of that with very, very minimal disease. So that was another big plus. The disease just dropped dramatically. By dropping the disease down, we were able to have better harvests, longer plants in the ground, less stress, and honestly a cleaner looking garden, if you want to say. So that worked out good. Not to mention, if you eliminate the diseases one year, then the next year they won't be as bad, especially if you couple it with crop rotations and stuff like that. So our powdery mildew wasn't as bad by any stretch of the imagination. It was almost non-existent this year, which for us, where it's really humid, is a big issue. And the other thing was our tomatoes, they get diseases, but because we weren't using the sprinkler, we weren't spreading the disease, so we could localize it to each plant. And that was really helpful as well. Now there is a time in my area where I'm in zone 8A in North Carolina, where we get really humid. You come out and the plants are just soaking wet every night. And it happens. You're gonna get the disease, you're gonna get that stuff, but by not adding anything extra to it, we were saving the plants. One other pro, which is actually a really big one, is I didn't have to tweak this at all. Other than the, periodic leak or something like that, or the hole in the hose or something, or, I nicked it with a hoe or something. I didn't have to come out and tweak it. Whereas when I was running the sprinklers, I was constantly working on it. And I mean, it was so bad, I'd have to come out here in a bathing suit and get, ready to work on it because I knew I was gonna get saturated. With this, and I need to work on something, guess what I can do? I can turn the water off to the bed, and the rest of the garden can get watered while I do a quick fix. So it's not really that big of an issue. And that was a really big alleviation of friction for me. I mean, it just, not having to do those tweaks all the time makes a big difference. And the thing is when you turn on your system, you can hear when you have a leak from a distance, so you need to fix it. So it's really not that bad. But the sprinklers, I'd go out and I'd tweak it and I'd move it, and it wouldn't be covering something, or I'd want it to spray farther, and I was just trying constantly to stay on top of it. Or the sprinkler wouldn't reach far, so then I need to get another sprinkler. So over time, all these things added up. So it was a really big headache. And when it comes to feeding a garden and fertilizing it, the drip system has changed the game for me completely, because I also bought an injector, which factors into that price I told you. And all that is it's you hook it up at the hose bib, and it'll mix it and just leach that liquid fertilizer through the entire system. You can use a fish fertilizer, you can use anything that's liquid. And so the whole system will run that fertilizer through very slow, and the fertilizer is directly feeding to the roots. It hits the roots only. It doesn't hit the surface, it doesn't hit the grass, it doesn't do anything else, but it's hitting the roots, because we're trying to plant on the emitters as much as possible. So that definitely has helped. And the soil, you know, I checked it a lot, and I still check it. The top inch of soil may be dry, but then underneath it stays nice and damp and cool. You can cool the roots a lot easier. So all of these things they're adding up now, and we're starting to see those benefits behind it. And it's really, the drip system has been a huge game changer in the garden. I hate that I was against it for so long, but like I said, I was ignorant to the whole situation. There's other pros to it and not as many cons, and you know, they're minuscule, but they definitely make a difference. But the biggest thing that I walked away with from all of this is, one, that it was more expensive, but with a more expensive system came a more efficient, well-oiled machine that should be in place for years to come, I would imagine. I mean, at this point, I'm not really looking to replace anything, maybe the drip lines periodically, but for the most part, nothing else needs to be changed. And two, don't hesitate. If you want to do it. And the biggest tip I can give you is go ahead and get it done while there's nothing in your garden, because then you can bury your drip line appropriately and plant on top of it like you need to. We went through last year when we added them in, for instance, we had our onions and garlic in, and we did not bury the lines first, or we couldn't bury the lines. So we had to lay them on top, and it was just always in the way. And they didn't get watered as they were supposed to, but you know, we knew that was gonna be something that needed to be fixed in the future. And every time we plant, like if we empty a bed and we replant it, typically speaking, we're going ahead and emptying out or pulling out the drip lines and then reburying them until we find the depth that we want. And you may have to change it. So the potatoes need to be deep. For potatoes, it needs to be deeper. For lettuce, it doesn't need to be as deep. So we just need to stay on top of that. And just sometimes they do need to be reburied. But other than that, I mean, like I said before, I was an unbeliever, and now I'm a believer in the drip system.